Good afternoon. I'm Matthew Spaulding, Associate Vice President and Dean of Educational Programs for Hillsdale College in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Allan P. Kirby Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship. Hillsdale College is an independent institution of higher learning founded in 1844, grateful for civil and religious liberty, and believing that the diffusion of learning is essential to the perpetuity of those blessings. And so for 170 years, Hillsdale has provided moral instruction, education, and the liberal arts to students, regardless of race, creed, or color. The Kirby Center in Washington, D.C. is to extend the college's mission to the nation's capital by teaching students, staffers, citizens, and statesmen about the first principles of liberty and constitutional government and how to apply those principles in today's difficult politics. Today's lecture is co-sponsored by the YG Network, an independent nonprofit dedicated to supporting conservative policies and the efforts of policymakers who fight for those policies. They believe that by seeking reforms that create jobs, encourage innovation, instill fiscal discipline, and reform key programs, we can create an environment for America's businesses and entrepreneurs to succeed and flourish. They have recently released Room to Grow, Conservative Reforms for a Limited Government and a Thriving Middle Class, copies of which were on your chairs today. The idea of conservative policy reform and the application of principle to today's challenges come together in our speaker. I first met Marco Rubio before he became Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives. We were trying to remember when exactly that was. When he invited me to Miami to lead a First Principles retreat for him and his incoming legislative leadership. What was immediately clear is that here was a man who knew what he was doing because he knew what he believed. That has much to do with his background. Born to working-class parents who had fled Fidel Castro's Cuba, he went to school in Miami, graduated from the University of Florida and the University of Miami Law School. He is happily married, and he and his wife, Jeanette, have 4 children. From 2002 to 2008, he served in the Florida House of Representatives, during which he was Majority Whip, Majority Leader, and Speaker. Since January 2011, he has served as a United States Senator from Florida. During this time in the Senate, he has become a leading reform thinker, aiming to conserve the principles of liberty, while at the same time addressing the real and practical challenges we face as a people. Today he is speaking on finding economic security in an insecure time. On behalf of Hillsdale College and the YG Network, please join me in welcoming Senator Marco Rubio.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the YG Network and to Hillsdale College for hosting this and for this opportunity that we have today. I want to thank all of you for being a part of it, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to you about something that's very near and dear to my heart. So I'll begin by talking about both of my parents, who were born into difficult circumstances. My father lost his mother when he was a young boy, and he had to quit school and so he could go to work. My mother was raised by a father who was disabled, who struggled to provide for his 7 daughters. When both of my parents were young, they had dreams for their future. My father wanted to be a successful businessman. My mother wanted to be a famous movie star. But like most people who ever lived, they were born into societies where the dreams of people like them really didn't stand a chance. In fact, they felt trapped in the circumstances, and they were so frustrated by their inability to improve their lives. And so they came here to the one place on earth where how you start out in life does not determine where you end up. They came to the United States of America. Now here they never became wealthy either. They worked service jobs at hourly wages. We never had a maid at our house. My mother was one for a living. And they didn't have fancy cars. My father drove the same embarrassing '73 Chevy Impala for over 20 years. And yet I consider myself to be from a background of great privilege. Because I was privileged to be raised in a stable family, privileged that my parents had jobs that allowed them to provide for their children. And I was privileged to be born in a land of equal opportunity, the one place on earth where the son of a bartender and a maid could achieve the same things as the son of a president or a millionaire. I come from privilege because while the hope of a better life is a universal one, it is also one few people ever get the chance to achieve. We are blessed to live in a country, however, on whose cornerstone is etched the principle that all people have a God-given right to go as far as their talent and their effort will take them. And in fact, here, because so many people here have been able to achieve the universal dream of a better life, this dream has actually come to bear our name. They call it the American dream. Now, for most, this dream has never been about becoming rich or famous. It's about things like having a good job that pays enough to own a home, feed your family, and save for retirement. About the flexibility to work and spend time with your family. The freedom to worship as you please and live without fear for your family's safety. And ultimately, it's about giving your children the opportunity at a life even better than your own. The American dream holds us together as one people. It defines us as a special nation. We can overcome bad presidents and tough economies and even divisive issues. But if we were to ever lose the American dream, we would lose our identity. There simply cannot be an America without the American dream. And that is why the crisis before us today is that there are millions of our people who feel that this dream is slipping away. Now, the American dream is still attainable, but it has gotten increasingly difficult to achieve for far too many. Wages have stagnated. Everyday costs have risen. Industries that once flourished have dried up, their jobs shipped overseas or lost to automation, and millions go to sleep each night overcome with the sense that they are just one bad break away from complete financial ruin. Over the last 6 years, this insecurity has coiled itself around people from every walk of life. But it's been particularly difficult for three sets of Americans. First, for our more than 10 million single mothers. Many of them have been abandoned by the father of their children, left to face the struggles of parenthood all by themselves. Many of them are stuck in jobs with low wages and inflexible work hours. And at every turn, they feel like the deck is stacked against them. Their everyday costs rise while their paychecks remain stagnant. They lose jobs because after-school care closes in the early evening, and they can't work late. They feel guilty that they can't afford and they don't have the time to sign their children up for soccer or dance like the other kids do. And they feel helpless to get their children out of failing schools. We also see the erosion of the American dream in the lives of many young Americans, including many recent college graduates. Their generation is coming of age in an era of lowered expectations, where too often their caps and gowns come not just with hope and excitement, but also with dread and apprehension. Many of them did everything they were told was necessary to succeed, but now they sit in their childhood bedrooms under the weight of thousands in student loans, unable to start a career or a family. And finally, we see the rising struggles of our working class families, parents who work longer and harder than ever before and yet are falling further and further behind. The workers who search in vain for good jobs that once supported their families, and small business owners on the verge of losing what they fought their entire lives to create. For millions of single parents and young Americans and working families, the promise that hard work and perseverance would lead to a better life, this promise has gone unfulfilled. And as a result, too many are starting to believe the American dream is no longer possible for people like them. The erosion of this dream is not simply the result of a Great Recession. In fact, it is primarily the result of a rapid and disruptive transformation of our economy, a transformation being driven by automation and globalization. You see, there was once a time when we were one of the few developed economies in the world. But now there are dozens of developed economies that have lowered taxes and cut regulations in an effort to attract job-creating investment away from us. There was once a time when people like my parents with limited formal education could still find jobs that paid enough to make it to the middle class. But now, because of advances in technology, virtually all the good jobs require a level of education well beyond high school. But instead of adjusting to the realities of this new era, many of our institutions are failing us, and none more so than our federal government. Instead of attracting jobs to our shores through simplifying taxes and regulations, our federal government is imposing higher taxes and more regulations that push investment and innovation to other countries. Instead of anti-poverty programs that promote work and education so our people can emerge from poverty, we are pumping more money into programs that have failed us now for over half a century. Instead of taking steps to make higher education more available and more affordable, We pour resources into a system that is expensive, inaccessible, and quite frankly is graduating way too many people with unemployable degrees. And instead of modernizing our retirement programs to make them accessible to everyone, we put more money into unsustainable programs that were designed in the 1930s. And the result is that a growing number of people feel completely alienated from our government and from our leaders. They feel that no one here in Washington understands what they're facing, and no one here has answers to their challenges. So, by the way, it should be no surprise that disapproval of our government and pessimism about the direction of our country have reached an all-time high. Because the inability of our leaders to respond to the challenges and the opportunities of the 21st century is denying a growing number of people access to the American dream. Now, President Obama deserves credit for hosting a summit earlier this week, focused on helping working families. But the truth is, the ideas he offered are symbolic more than they are substantive. They don't go far enough. In fact, up to this point in his presidency, his plan to restore the American dream has been an old and familiar one. Raise taxes, create more regulations, pour more money into government programs, and accuse anyone who doesn't agree with him of not caring. Well, the globalization and technological advances that are changing our economy, they are producing disruptive challenges. But they also present exciting opportunities. The opportunity to innovate faster and in more areas than ever before. The opportunity to sell the products we make and the services we provide to more people in more places than ever before. This new century can also be an American century, with the American dream within reach of more people than ever before. But our current path, the path of the old and tired ideas of big government, this path will never lead us to that better future. To restore the American dream, we need a policy agenda designed specifically for the 21st century. A limited government and free enterprise movement that applies the principles of our founding to the challenges and the opportunities facing Americans in their daily lives. Americans like Christine, a young, single mother of 2 preschool-age girls. Christine lives in Florida, and she's the primary provider for her 2 daughters. Christine works at a pet boarding facility. She makes $370 a week after taxes. Daycare for the girls costs $235 a week, which she says is like signing over a paycheck every month. Christine knows that the key to a better job is acquiring new skills, so she started taking online courses in early childhood education. She hoped that this would lead to a higher salary, but also a more flexible work schedule so she could spend more time with her daughters. But like millions of other Americans, our outdated higher education system left Christine unable to finish, because the online courses she'd been taking cost her around $1,200 per course. And even if she had received a scholarship or a Pell Grant, she still felt like the time and resources required were simply too much, given her responsibilities at work and at home. And so Christine dropped out. She dedicated herself to earning more money any way she could. She sells nutrition supplements at a local farmer's market on weekends. She makes costume accessories for girls' birthday parties and sells them online. And she got rid of everything that wasn't essential, cable, even her cell phone. She was determined to live independently. But nothing she tried was enough. No matter how hard she worked, her earnings were simply too little and her costs too great. And so today, Christine, along with 42 million other women in America, finds herself on the edge of poverty and slipping over. The solutions President Obama and his party offer single mothers like her have not worked. Their idea of helping is to spend more money on programs that do nothing to help Christine escape poverty. Their idea of helping her get an education is a gimmick designed to win elections rather than reforms designed to bring higher education within her reach. And the result is that Americans like Christine are feeling pessimistic about the future of our country. And they are frustrated that no one in Washington seems to understand the challenges facing them. But here's worst of all. They hold little hope that their lives will improve. To restore the American dream, we have to change that. First, we need modern reforms to our anti-poverty programs. Reforms that would incentivize and reward the work Christine does now, while also helping her acquire the skills she needs for a better job later. These innovations will never come from the federal government's rigid, one-size-fits-all approach. That's why I've proposed combining all of our existing federal anti-poverty money into a flex fund that would be made available to the states, which do have the ability to design innovative and targeted programs to address the unique needs of their residents. Liberals offer up increases in taxes and the minimum wage as ways of helping the struggling earn more. What they don't tell you is that these policies would result in many people like Christine potentially losing their jobs. So as an alternative, I've proposed replacing the flawed existing earned income tax credit with a wage enhancement credit that would boost her wage at the pet kennel. We also need to bring education within Christine's reach. The big government solution for the cost of higher education is to slightly lower the monthly payment on existing student loans. But instead of short-term gimmicks like this, a better approach would be to implement the reforms I outlined earlier this year that would both lower costs and encourage the creation of more affordable and accessible routes to higher education and to a degree. The online courses that Christine was taking, by the way, are actually more expensive than the cost of physically attending her local community college. Even if she received financial help, she couldn't find an option that allowed her enough flexibility to work full-time and raise her family. And the reason for all of this is an outdated process called accreditation. A school must be accredited to award degrees that provide financial aid. But here's the catch. Established institutions control the accrediting process. And as a result, the entrenched higher education cartel has the power to block out innovative, lower-cost competitors. So I have proposed that Congress established a new independent accrediting process designed to open the door for more innovative and affordable schools. And I propose ways to help Christine package the free tools all around her into an employable degree, tools such as online resources, apprenticeships, mentorships, and personal study. Now, unlike most traditional students, Christine also needs affordable daycare for her daughters. Even with government help, her out-of-pocket costs run into hundreds a month. And if she decided to pursue her education full-time, she would lose her current child care credit. So I propose allowing parents who are pursuing their education full-time to remain eligible for the child care credit. Daycare is far from the only burdensome expense that Christine has, by the way. From rent to her electric bill to car insurance, gas, and food, the cost of living is rising around her like floodwaters. That's why Senator Mike Lee and I have been working together to design pro-family tax reforms. As part of our upcoming proposal, the per-child tax credit she currently receives would be raised from $1,000 to $2,500 so she can keep more of her own money. And that credit would be made refundable up to the total payroll and income tax liabilities, which means whatever isn't saved through her reduction of tax liability would be received in the form of a check. And finally, given the dreams she has for her children, Christine is worried about the fact that her daughters will soon be forced to attend public schools that do not meet her standards for their education. Too many poor parents are denied the opportunity to send their children to the school of their choice. They can't afford to move to a neighborhood with better schools, and they can't afford private school tuition. And that's why I've proposed a federal tax credit that encourages contributions to scholarship-granting organizations that distribute private school scholarships to needing children like hers. We cannot preserve our standing as an exceptional nation if the American dream isn't possible for people like Christine. And if we don't put in place modern conservative reforms that will help her earn more, to keep more of what she earns, to go back to school, and to send her girls to the best school possible, then Christine and millions of Americans like her are going to be left behind. But the single most important thing we can do to help her and every American is to unleash the prosperity that comes from a growing free enterprise economy. And no group of Americans would benefit from robust economic growth more than young Americans like Jennifer and Evan. Jennifer and Evan both live in my hometown of Miami. They've never met one another, but they share a similar and increasingly common story. Jennifer graduated 4 years ago from Florida International University with a degree in public administration. She was the first in her family to go to college. Growing up, her father told her what mine told me, that an education was her ticket to a life better than his own. But 4 years after earning her degree, she and her father fell on tough times. Her father was laid off, and the only job Jennifer could find was unrelated to her degree. It barely paid enough to get by, much less help out her father the way she wished she could. So they both had to move in with Jennifer's grandmother. Meanwhile, Evan graduated last year from Liberty University with a degree in sports management, but also with a mountain of student loan debt. He moved back to Florida to begin the full-time job of looking for a full-time job. And he's still looking today. He was recently able to find 2 part-time jobs. One is at a retail store. The other allows him a glimpse of the industry he hopes of breaking into. He helps out as a game day assistant for the Miami Heat. Between his 2 jobs, Evan brings home about $500 a month. This was barely enough to scrape by to begin with. But recently he received a letter. Starting next week, on the 1st of July, he will have to start paying his nearly $20,000 in student loan debt. His finances were already teetering on the brink, and this will likely push them over. The good news is that neither Jennifer nor Evan has lost hope. But far too many young Americans like them are starting to accept their current struggles as a new normal. They worry that a growing job-producing economy is a thing of the past. In fact, just this morning, we received more evidence that our economy is headed in the wrong direction. During the first 3 months of this year, not only did our economy not grow, it shrank by 2.9%, the biggest drop in 5 years. It doesn't have to be this way. If we can put in place policies that will spur dynamic economic growth and make higher education more affordable, we can restore the American dream for millions of young Americans. In order to achieve that economic growth that leads to millions of better paying jobs, what we need are policies that incentivize investment and innovation. Which is why I've proposed tax reforms that make America a more attractive place to invest and regulatory reforms that help this remain the best place in the world to innovate. This will create millions of jobs for our graduates. But creating jobs alone is not going to be enough. Young Americans still need to be able to acquire skills without also acquiring a lifetime of student loan debt. For example, Jennifer knows that getting a master's degree will help her get the kind of job that she desires. But she doesn't want to go $50,000 into debt to get it. As I mentioned before, the first step to making college more affordable is allowing more innovation and competition in higher education, so you don't have to borrow that much to begin with. But we also need to think of easier ways to pay for and to plan for the cost of a degree. For Evan, his loans are the primary obstacle that are preventing him from pursuing his dreams. Now, going into college, he knew the cost. But what he didn't know was how hard it would be to find a job with his degree. Which is why I have filed bipartisan legislation with Senator Ron Wyden that would require schools to tell students how much their graduates earn with their chosen degree. Second, I've proposed making income-based repayment the automatic repayment method for student loans. This way, Evan's loan payments would be directly correlated to how much he earns each month, removing the risk of default. And third, I have proposed an alternative to student loans called student investment plans. Students would be able to enter into an agreement with a private firm in which the firm pays for the student's education in return for a percentage of their salary for a set number of years after graduation. Modern reforms that lead to economic growth and increased education options would benefit all Americans. They would benefit single mothers like Christine and young people like Jennifer and Evan. But they would also help working families like the Broyles. Danny and Becky Broyles operate a small business called Foreign Accents, which sells home furnishings from all over the world. They are the only 2 employees, not including summer and weekend help from their 3 sons aged 13, 16, 19. The Broyles started their business 17 years ago, and it's always been small, but it's always provided enough to get by. That is until the recession hit in 2007. The impact on their business was nearly devastating. To survive, they began racking up expenses on multiple credit cards, and they knew it was a desperate move, but they had no choice. And sure enough, it backfired. After a few late payments, the banks started hiking their interest rates, and the debt on their shoulders began to compound. At this point, like at every time of trial in their lives, Daniel and Becky leaned on their faith to get through. With 3 boys who depended on them, they prayed that God would reveal the right way forward. Together they discussed their options. One of them could go back to school and try to get another job. But the job market made this a risky gamble when weighed against the costs of an education. As Daniel said, he never felt that was the right answer. And then just when the situation seemed to hit rock bottom, a couple of contracts started trickling in. A few customers returned to the shop. Business wasn't what it was before, but it was enough to break even and stop the debt from rising. They decided to dig in and try to see the business through. But just as things were starting to look up, they were hit with another problem. And this one came directly from Washington, D.C. It's called Obamacare. And Daniel described what happened to his premiums. Around the time the recession hit, his family paid $440 a month for health insurance. But year after year, as the Obamacare debate raged on and eventually the law was signed, the premium started edging up. This was a burden, but it was nothing compared to what came when the law went into effect. His monthly premium shot up from $520 to $660. And worse, his deductible doubled from $2,500 to $5,000. So they couldn't afford it. So they dropped their coverage. They turned to a faith-based program called MediShare, which allows members to spread out the burden of costs and coverage. Now, the good news is today the Broyles are getting by. Their eldest son helps out with a business while working toward his online education. Their youngest 2 look forward to one day getting their degrees as well. Despite their struggles, they find fulfillment and purpose in the business they've worked the better part of 20 years to build. But they're uncertain about the future. They don't have much money put away for retirement. In fact, Daniel jokes that he was thinking about running for Congress because he heard our benefits were great. Our outdated laws, taxes, and education system and the growing burden of Obamacare are making life harder than it needs to be for working families like the Broyles. And in order to restore the American dream, we need to change that. My growth agenda will help them by elevating the entire economy. As they have found throughout 17 years in business, when the economy is growing and thriving, more customers come by their shop. Pro-growth tax reform will allow them to fully expense every investment they make in their company, making it easier for them to expand, earn more, and maybe even create a job or 2. Pro-family tax reform will help them with the cost of living. For their 2 younger sons, the Broyles receive a child tax credit of $1,000. But just like Christine, the reforms I'm working on with Mike Lee would raise this to as much as $2,500, and it would make it refundable. Pro-education tax reform would help them with the cost of higher education for their kids. Joined by Representative Congressman Aaron Schock, I have proposed that we update and consolidate higher education tax incentives into one simple, easy-to-understand tax credit that applies universally to higher education and skills obtainment. And market-centered health care reform will help them grow their businesses and receive quality care at an affordable price. Obamacare is a disaster, but the answer is not to simply return to the way things were before. The answer is to repeal and replace Obamacare with modern market-centered reforms. Reforms that would give the Broyles control over their health care decisions by giving them the power to buy the kind of health insurance they want from any company they choose at a price they can afford. And finally, we need to bring the prospect of a dignified and secure retirement within their reach. Retirement in the 21st century will look different than it has in the past. People will work longer, not only because they have to, but also because, like the Broyles, they enjoy it. But the 3 pillars of our current American retirement system, Social Security, pensions, and personal savings, are crumbling. And the answer is to implement modern solutions that save Social Security and Medicare without making any changes for people currently in the system. Solutions that gradually raise the retirement age for workers like myself. But we must make it easier and more profitable for those who choose to work beyond retirement age by removing the retirement earnings test and eliminating the payroll tax on older workers as well. We must make it saving easier for the 75 million Americans who don't have 401ks through their employers. Last month, I proposed opening the federal government's thrift savings plan, which is like a 401k only with lower costs and generally better returns, opening it up to all Americans who lack access to an employer plan. So Daniel and Becky can have Congress's retirement plan after all. No congressional campaign necessary. Let me conclude by just saying a few things about this. You know, growing up, I knew this country was special. From my earliest days, my parents taught me that no dream was too big and there was no goal that was out of reach for me, because I was an American son. Each person I've introduced you to today also believes that America is special. But they're starting to wonder if it's still true for people like them. And they increasingly doubt it will be true for their own children. Their American dreams aren't much different than my parents'. Christine wants to raise her daughters to be strong and self-sufficient. Jennifer wants to find a fulfilling job. Evan wants to pay off his loans and reach financial security by the time he's ready to start a family. And the Broyles, they just want to run their business, send their children to college, and retire securely. Ultimately, what each of them wants is what everyone wants: the chance to build a better life for themselves and the chance at an even better life for their children. This is the dream that defines our nation. This is the dream that binds us together as one people. And this is the dream that we are now called upon to restore. Today, people like Christine and Jennifer and Evan and the Broyles family have serious doubts about whether our current leaders are up to that task. They feel as if neither party understands, cares, or has answers for the problems that they face. For those of us who serve or aspire to serve in public office, our goal must be to offer real hope for our future and real change for our nation. The hope of ushering in the most prosperous and promising era in our history, and the change that it will require to achieve it. We Americans have good reason to be hopeful, for no nation is better positioned to access the full promise of the 21st century economy. This new economy is all about innovation, creativity, and productivity, and we are the most creative, innovative, and productive people on the planet. And the changes we must make to achieve this better future come from fundamental truths about our nation: that government exists to empower its people, and that our free enterprise economy is the greatest generator of opportunity and prosperity in human history. From these principles, we see that if we reform our taxes and regulations, we can create millions of higher-paying jobs by winning the global competition for talent, investment, and innovation. And if we modernize our outdated safety net programs and revolutionize how we acquire and pay for education, millions of people will have the skills they need for the higher-paying jobs of the new economy. 21st century America was special, but 21st century America has the potential to be even better. But this better tomorrow will not happen on its own. For 2 centuries, this nation has endured as an exceptional one because each generation before us has risen to meet the challenges and seize the opportunities of their time. Now it is our turn. We will either adapt to the new era and bring about another American century, or like so many nations before us, our inability to address new realities will usher in our decline. And our success will not be measured simply by the size of our economy or the performance of our stocks. Rather, it will depend on whether Americans like Christine and Jennifer and Evan and the Broyles family will get the real chance to earn for themselves a better life, on whether the American dream becomes possible for them the way it's been for so many before. This is the standard by which we will be judged, and it should be. For being the land of equal opportunity is what sets us apart from all the nations on earth. The great cause of our time is to reclaim the American dream for more of our people than ever before, and in so doing, to leave for our children what our parents left for us: the single greatest nation the world has ever known. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.
We have time for some questions for the Senator. If you would raise your hand, and also we have microphones so it can be picked up on our audio feed. Yes, sir.
Senator Rubio, thank you very much for speaking to us today. This morning on MSNBC, you voiced your opposition to the Export-Import Bank. If Harry Reid attached a measure to reauthorize XM to a continuing resolution to fund the government, would you vote for or against it?
Well, he shouldn't. I mean, that's actually trying to force the hand of the people of our country on an issue of that magnitude. Look, I don't think we should shut down the federal government. And I would hope that he wouldn't attach such an important thing, such as continuing the operations of essential services, to an issue which there's legitimate debate on. But I do think this issue is important enough to have a full debate on. Not enough to shut the government down over, but certainly one that I won't support standing on its own.
Senator Rubio, thank you. We are learning the hard lesson that elections have consequences. If we are fortunate enough to retain the House in the fall and recapture the Senate, what do you think can be done immediately to derail the freight train that's overrunning us?
Well, I outlined a lot of it right now, and I hope that that's what we'll do. Look, what our country's in desperate need of is a modern agenda that responds to what people are going through in their daily lives. And to me, it involves three fundamental pillars. The first is we once again have to have vigorous and robust economic growth. And economic growth in the 21st century requires us becoming, once again, the best place in the world to invest and innovate. That's why having pro-growth tax reform, having control on our regulations that crowd out innovation, and quite frankly, dealing with our national debt issues, which scare long-term investment. These things are critical to getting that sort of growth. The second pillar is we've got to capacitate our people with the skills they need for the better jobs of the 21st century. And that involves both re-examining the way we help people in need of better jobs through our safety net programs and creating or incentivizing the creation of safety net programs that don't just treat the symptoms of poverty, but deal with its causes, what's driving them. But we also need a higher education system that is flexible and accessible. And to me, that ranges from graduating people from high school ready to go to work, certified in a vocation such as being a plumber, a welder, BMW technician, an airplane mechanic, all the way to making the existing four-year college track more affordable through the options that I've outlined. And it also includes creating options, especially for non-traditional students who have to work full-time and raise a family, because they're the ones that are trapped in $9 or $10 an hour jobs. And the only way they're ever going to triple their pay is by acquiring the skills they need for the jobs that pay more. I think the third element that we don't discuss nearly enough is the role of values in our country. I believe that you can have all the diplomas on the wall you want. If you don't have certain values, such as hard work and discipline and self-control, you're not going to succeed. You can't have a strong country without strong people. You can't have strong people without strong values. No one is born with these values. These values are taught to us, and they're reinforced by the community around us and in our families. And so it should be no surprise that the erosion of American family life has led to an erosion in values and a subsequent erosion in our economy. So primarily the role of having strong families is incumbent on us as fathers and mothers and parents and people living in the community, but certainly government should not be making family life more difficult, which is why I believe in pro-family tax reforms, why I believe that we should stop stigmatizing those groups in our society that instill and reinforce those positive values that we have, why we shouldn't have any government programs that punish marriage like many of our safety net programs do. I think these three things are fundamental to not just restoring the American dream, but actually making the 21st century better than the 20th, as hard as that may be to imagine. It's truly there for the taking if we do a few things to get us there. I think much of this agenda are the kinds of things that we can work on a bipartisan basis, and some are going to be the consequences of what I hope will be an election that elects new people with better ideas.
I know there have been a number of studies showing the longer-lasting negative impacts of graduating in a recession, but it seems like American students in general have done better than European students. So I was wondering what you would say contributes to higher American college graduate employment, and if you could go into a little more detail on the kinds of reforms.
I mean, part of it is that
like
our economy. Yeah, I'm sorry. Our economy is now built in a way, and this is only going to be accelerated, that all the better-paying jobs of the 21st century are going to have a higher skill attainment. So when you look at haves and have-nots in America today, that divide is largely between those that have some form of higher education and those that do not have some form of higher education. So it's not a surprise that in an economy which has felt the impact of technology and globalization faster than any other on the planet, that would be the fact, that if you have some level of higher education, you're going to be better off than those that do not. But even among those that have higher education, we have challenges, because we know for a fundamental fact that there are certain degrees that are better off at positioning you for employment than others. And I'm not sure our students have enough information about that before they go into their chosen degrees. Likewise, I think we have many students that would greatly benefit, or potential students that would greatly benefit from higher education. I used the example of a home health aide. If you're a home health aide, you make $9 or $10 an hour. And that's not going to go up dramatically because that's a business that's based on limited reimbursement rates. The only way you're ever going to make more money is if you can become an ultrasound technician, or better than that, a nurse. But if you have 3 kids at home that you have to raise and a job you have to go full-time, you can't just drop everything and go to school, at least not a traditional school. We've got to figure out a way to get people living in those circumstances access to higher education in a way that's both cost-effective and also time-effective. And for me, that involves allowing people to package learning no matter where they acquire it from. You should be able to package all of your learning that you've acquired through life experience, work experience, internships, free online courses, courses at a local community college, subjects that you've mastered on your own and are willing to test proficiency. You should be able to package all of that into the equivalent of a degree that is recognized by the private sector that will allow you to be employed. And that's the dynamic that is most in need. So there are issues with the cost of higher education on the traditional route, but we also need to establish a stronger non-traditional four-year college route for millions of people, like Christine, who need higher education to get ahead, but simply can't afford it and don't have the time for the traditional model.
Senator, your ideas are, at least from our perspective, good ideas. What do you find in speaking to your colleagues in the Senate and in Congress, and also to the American people? Do you find an understanding of the connection between the policies that have been pursued in government and the damage they do to economic growth? Because arguably, without greater economic growth, these other problems are harder to solve.
I think we still have an ideological debate about what generates economic growth. I mean, primarily those on the left believe that economic growth is driven by government expenditure. The government spends money, that money creates demand, and that demand drives growth. I think the latest economic reports indicate that that's not the case. You know, forget about economic growth, we have an economy that's shrinking. I mean, we're lucky if we break even these days. And that's a real challenge, because without growth, you can't create more jobs. You can't create more prosperity. Going back to this example that I used of the Broyles anecdotally will tell you, the better the economy is doing, the more customers we have. And so this impacts everyone. So I think we still have this debate going on about what drives growth. I think we have 200 and some odd years of American history to prove what drives growth, and that is investment and innovation. You create growth when someone has access to money, whether they borrowed it, saved it, whatever it may be, and risks that money to start a new business or grow an existing one. And you create explosive growth when you innovate, when you offer a service or a product that no one else does. And we have seen the impact of both. I mean, in your very pockets right now, I am sure, is an example of American ingenuity and innovation. Just think about the millions of jobs that have been created because of the explosion in information technology. You have more information on a cell phone in your hand than the information on that phone would take a whole room this size just 15 or 20 years ago to store. Those are American innovations that have created millions of jobs and opportunities. We need to remain the best place in the world for that to happen. And if I have one criticism of my party, is that too often Republicans have allowed themselves to be a party that is not for growth, but for big business from time to time. And the result, and I will just tell you that big business, in many occasions, is not necessarily opposed to regulation, because regulation crowds out competitors. In Miami, Florida right now, we can't get Uber to operate. And I know that's a very DC-centric debate to have, I suppose, because everyone in this room has used it. But it's a big deal in Miami. There's this car service. It's innovative. It challenges an established incumbent. And it can't break into the market because the established incumbent has used the power that they have over government and the influence they have over government to have regulations written to keep them out. That's just in car service. You find an example of that in virtually every space in our economy. Imagine if Blockbuster Video had convinced the federal government to pass a law to protect children from getting their hands on bad movies. They would pass a law that says, from now on, if you rent a movie, you must rent it from a retail store and you must show ID. We would never have had downloading. We would never have had Netflix or anybody else. And think about that for a moment. But that's not outside the stretch of the imagination. Those sorts of regulations that are used to protect incumbent industries at the expense of competitors happens all the time. I don't think that gets nearly enough attention from the Republican side of the aisle. From the Democratic side of the aisle, Their beliefs that more government spending, if that were the case, we should be leading the world in economic growth.
Senator, I'm a rising senior in high school, and ever since I can remember, I've always wanted to one day run for political office. What steps do you recommend I take?
Run away from it, no. You know, I think that's a great question, and you should actually be congratulated for aspiring to serve our country in public office. The 3 points I would make is I obviously need to finish your education and get as broad an education as possible, but also practical, because you need to go out in the world and be able to provide for yourself. Second, I would say is don't run for office until you know why you're running. And it can't be because I want to be in office. It has to be because you have a vision for what you want the future to look like, and you think you actually have ideas that will help get us there. And that would be my advice. I've met a lot of people that have run for office because someone showed them a poll that said they would win. But then they're very unhappy in that office, unless you just want to be called senator. But I think the more rewarding way to run for office is to say, I have a clear and compelling vision that I feel passionate about what tomorrow should look like. And I have ideas to get us there that I don't hear anyone else talking about. And I want to be in a position to make that happen. And when that moment comes in your life that you feel that way, and it makes sense for you in every other aspect of your life, I encourage you to pursue it. Public service is a noble way to serve this country. We need more good people in office. Scott, if you have the mic, it's you. Yeah.
Please do something about the children in southwest part of the country. Close the borders. We cannot have people continue to flood in here like they are, undocumented, uncared for. Secure the borders, and then we have got to figure out what to do with those children.
Yeah,
please.
That's a very complicated situation because of who we're dealing with. We are dealing with many, not all are children, but we're dealing with many young children who have been sent here, and that problem has multifaceted reasons for it. One is that those Central American countries are extremely dangerous, with an enormous amount of drug violence and gang violence and poverty. That's the initial driver. That's the reason why they decide to leave. Think about how desperate you have to be as a parent to put your kid on a train by themselves at 6 years of age and send them abroad. That's the reason why they decide to leave. The reason why they decide to come here, unfortunately, is because somehow an urban myth has been created in many of these communities that if you come to America as a child or a mother with children, you're going to get to stay. And that's something that we need to reverse. And so that's why I have sent letters to the ambassadors of 4 countries, Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, asking them to please do everything they can to inform people in their country that this is not true, that our law does not allow them to come here and stay, and that they're endangering their children's lives. And so this issue is reminiscent of other mass migration issues we've faced in the past. We've had mass migrations from Cuba, from the Dominican Republic, and other places. And this one is endemic of that. Unfortunately, this one is an example of that. The further challenge that we have is that our infrastructure is not built to address this. The Border Patrol is designed to patrol the border and prevent illegal crossings of people, weapons, and drugs. They're not there to provide care. And I think we're asking for a humanitarian crisis here. We're continuing to house young minors in facilities that weren't designed to house people. So this is a very serious issue that needs to be confronted. I think the first step is to get the word out in those countries that you can't stay, and then ultimately do what we can to process those kids through that system and return them to a safer environment.
One last question.
Thank you, Senator. Last year, Senator John McCain, referring to immigrants, said they mow our lawns and care for our children. I believe this is offensive to immigrants as well as Americans, but I think he's echoing the sentiment of Democrats and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce when he says things like that. When I was younger, and I'm probably about your age, I was a porter. I did painting, roofing, siding. I even dug ditches for septic fields. So I completely reject that notion. My question to you regarding immigration as it relates to our economy is how can we justify more and more low-skilled labor when we have, we have 50 million people on food stamps, we have 99 weeks of unemployment, lowest labor participation rate since the Carter administration. So it would seem to me that more people of all backgrounds, more Americans of all backgrounds would perform work like I did, or even pick the lettuce, if the government would stop paying them to, not all of them, but a large majority of them, for basically being non-productive. So I guess the question really is, what's the best policy to address both immigration and the...
Well, first of all, you do have industries that rely predominantly on migrant labor, and in particular in the agricultural industry, as you've outlined, as a function of global competition. Because low labor costs abroad make it difficult for our agriculture industry to compete if it has to pay beyond a certain threshold. Although, by the way, labor costs in our agriculture industry are also regulated at a certain minimum level. But I think what you're getting at is a second question, and that is our immigration system a 21st century immigration system? And the answer is it is not. Our current immigration system is primarily a family reunification system. It is a system that is built to reunify families. So if you have an innovative new product or idea or have some special skill or merit that perhaps you could contribute to the economy, your chances of getting into the U.S. are often no better than someone who simply has a mother or father living here. And that is a system that potentially made sense in the earlier to mid part of the 20th century. In fact, in full frankness, that's how my parents came, because her sister was living in the United States. It does not reflect the 21st century. The 21st century immigration system has to be primarily a merit-based immigration system, one in which immigrants to the U.S. come primarily on the basis of what they can contribute to the economy. And I've just described to you that we have an economy where in order to succeed, you have to have a higher level of skill and educational attainment. And our immigration system needs to reflect that. That alone is a reason why the immigration law needs to be reformed. Beyond that, you need to be able to enforce your immigration laws. Your immigration laws are only as good as your ability to enforce them. Every nation on the planet enforces their immigration law. Mexico enforces their immigration laws. Canada enforces their immigration laws. We need to enforce our immigration laws. Our existing mechanism for enforcing immigration laws don't work well. We have 3 sectors of the border that remain largely insecure. About 80% of these children are crossing in one of those sectors in the Rio Grande area. We know what works because the other 6 sectors have been largely secured due to investment in both personnel, technology, and structures. We have to have 40% of our illegal immigrants in this country entered legally. They came on an airplane and they stayed. And we have no way of tracking that because we're like a hotel that checks you in but never checks you out. And we have no enforcement mechanism for employers that employers are required to use in verifying that who they're hiring is legally here. Right now, you can show up with a paper document and say, this is me and this is my social security card. And quite frankly, the employer doesn't have to go much further than that, other than a good faith effort. We need to have an electronic-based system that employers are required to use to verify that who they're hiring is who they say they are and that they're legally here, because that's the magnet that's attracting much of this illegal immigration. The last challenge we face is the hardest one politically, and that is, what do you do with 12 million human beings that are living in the United States illegally? I can tell you what we're not going to do. We're not going to award 12 million people citizenship, and we're not going to round up and deport 12 million people. The fundamental challenge we face in Washington today is we will never have the votes or the political space or any chance at all of having the votes to address that issue of what to do with those 12 million until you've done the other 2 things first. Until people believe that truly the borders have been secured, the visas overstays are being controlled and stopped, and there's an employment verification system, people are not willing to have a conversation about what to do with those that are here illegally. People may not like it, but that's the way it is. That is a fact. That is not a matter of opinion. That is a fact. It is something I have said now for the better part of a year. Until we address those other things, I think people are willing to have a responsible conversation about what to do with the existing problem, but not until they know for sure that this isn't going to happen again. And I think an approach that says, trust us, isn't going to fly. And that's where we stand today on the whole issue. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.